In the heart of a vast, uncharted wilderness, where the sun rarely pierced the thick canopy of trees, a lion roamed alone. This was no ordinary lion. Unlike the dominant kings and queens of the savannah, he had long since parted ways with his pride. His mane, dark and matted with the dust of the forest floor, swayed gently as he padded silently through the underbrush. His eyes, golden and sharp, flicked from side to side as he moved. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was the type of place that seemed to swallow sound. Only the occasional snap of a twig underfoot broke the silence. The forest was dense, tangled with vines and thick foliage that seemed to close in on the lion with every step. His claws dug into the soft earth, creating deep grooves as he walked, his massive paws leaving an imprint on the forest floor, though it would soon be erased by the creeping moss and thick ferns. The weight of his isolation was heavy. For years he had survived on his own, a solitary wanderer in a world that had once been filled with the roars of his pride. Though he was a creature of strength, his journey through the forest was fraught with challenges. The trees, ancient and gnarled, blocked much of the sun, casting long, eerie shadows across his path. Each time he ventured deeper, the forest seemed to grow darker, more oppressive, as though the trees themselves were watching him, judging him for his solitude. The forest was alive with unseen eyes. Deer darted in the shadows, monkeys chattered from high above, and predators with sharper instincts than his own could smell his presence, though they remained hidden in the vast tangle of leaves and branches. The lion paused at the edge of a small, murky stream, the cool water reflecting his tired form. He lowered his head to drink, the reflection of his golden eyes staring back at him as ripples spread across the water's surface. The silence that followed felt deafening. His ears twitched at the faintest rustling in the underbrush, a movement far too subtle for any ordinary creature to notice. But he was no ordinary lion. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. Something was stalking him, a predator perhaps, drawn by the scent of his recent kill, or worse, a competitor, seeking to reclaim what was once his. His senses heightened and he stood still, eyes fixed on the darkened forest ahead. The rustling stopped, only to be replaced by a deep growl, low and rumbling, unlike any the lion had ever heard before. The sound echoed through the trees, reverberating off the thick trunks, sending a shiver through his body. The growl wasn't from a typical predator. This was something larger, something far more dangerous. His heart thudded louder in his chest as he backed away from the stream, his powerful legs carrying him back into the undergrowth. A sharp, piercing shriek split the air, followed by the sound of a struggle. Screeching, thrashing, and then silence. The lion's muscles tensed, but his instincts urged him forward toward the source of the noise. The hairs on his back stood up, his body trembling with both fear and excitement. This was no ordinary hunt. The balance of power in the forest had shifted. As he moved toward the source of the noise, the forest grew unnervingly quiet. The usual sounds of the jungle, the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, had all ceased, replaced by an oppressive stillness that sent a cold shiver down his spine. His paw steps grew cautious, each one measured and deliberate. The lion moved through the dense forest like a shadow, his golden eyes scanning every movement, every flicker of light through the trees. Finally, he reached the clearing where the source of the sound had come from. There, sprawled on the ground, was a massive carcass, large, fresh, and untouched. His nose twitched at the smell of death, but something was wrong. The lion's eyes narrowed as he spotted the cause of the strange growls and shrieks. A creature, half the size of a lion but much more menacing, loomed over the carcass. It had the face of a jaguar, but its body was larger, more muscular, with jagged scars running across its chest. The beast's eyes glowed with a cold, calculating hunger. It was a predator unlike anything the lion had ever encountered. This was no natural animal. It was a hybrid, a product of the forest's strange, untamed chaos. The lion's pulse quickened as the beast lifted its head, its eyes meeting his in a silent challenge. The creature took a slow step forward, its jagged claws scraping the earth, sending a sharp noise into the air. The lion growled low in his throat, a rumbling warning. The hybrid creature stood tall, unafraid, as though it had nothing to lose. Without warning, the battle erupted. The lion launched himself at the hybrid with all the force of a predator fighting for survival. Claws clashed, teeth snapped, and the two creatures twisted and fought in a blur of fur and muscle. The forest around them seemed to come alive with their struggle. Birds screeched into the sky and the trees shook with the force of their battle. The lion's roar echoed through the jungle, a challenge to all who would dare confront him. For what felt like an eternity they fought, ferocious, relentless, and unyielding. The lion's strength was matched by the hybrid's speed and ferocity, each blow more intense than the last. But just as the lion's claws sank into the hybrid's thick fur, the beast wrenched away, breaking free of the lion's grasp. It was then that the true twist came. The hybrid did not flee. Instead, it stepped back, letting out a guttural growl as it revealed something strange. Something that sent a chill through the lion's bones. From behind the hybrid, two more of the creatures emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light. They had been waiting, lurking in the unseen corners of the forest, drawn by the lion's challenge. For the first time in his life, the lion felt true fear. He was no longer the apex predator. He was now the hunted. Surrounded, outnumbered, and facing creatures unlike any he had ever known, the lion's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the battle was far from over. The jungle had changed. He had to survive. This was no longer just about defending his territory. It was about living through the night. With a final, desperate roar, the lion turned and bolted. The hybrid creatures, now in pursuit, chased him through the dense foliage, their growls and hisses echoing in the distance. The lion's breath came in sharp gasps as his muscles screamed for rest, but he didn't dare stop. Every inch of the forest was closing in on him. He could hear their footsteps behind him, feel their presence growing closer with every second. It was only a matter of time before they caught him, and then the ground beneath his paws gave way. He tumbled, falling into a deep ravine. The wind was knocked from his lungs as he collided with the jagged rocks below. Pain shot through his body, but his instincts kept him moving. He stumbled to his feet, blood dripping from his wounds, but he refused to give up. In that moment, the lion realized that survival was not just about strength, but about adaptation. In the ravine, he found something unexpected: shelter, a place where the hybrid predators could not reach him. The battle had shifted. He had found a way to survive, to outwit his enemies, and in doing so, he had discovered something deeper than mere territory or dominance. He had found a new kind of strength, the strength to endure, to adapt, and to outlast. As the sounds of his pursuers faded into the distance, the lion lay down in the shadows, nursing his wounds. The jungle around him was still, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet peace settle over him. The world was not kind to the lone wolf, or the lone lion, but it was always a way to survive, if one was willing to look beyond the pride. And in that moment, the lion understood that even the wildest, most desolate places could offer a home for those who were strong enough to seek it. As the night deepened, the forest around the lion grew even darker, with only the faint light of the moon filtering through the dense canopy above. The ravine, with its jagged edges and steep walls, offered a temporary refuge, but the lion knew it was not a place for him to linger long. He was no longer simply a predator in search of food and territory. He had become something else. A survivor, a creature that had learned to endure the harshest of circumstances. His wounds throbbed, each movement sending waves of pain through his body, but his resolve was stronger than ever. The hybrid creatures had been relentless, and though they were cunning and powerful, they were not invincible. The lion's sharp mind had already begun working on his next move, for he understood that survival was not just about brute strength, but about strategy, about waiting for the right moment to strike or to escape. The distant sound of the jungle, once again alive with the calls of birds and rustling leaves, was a reminder that time was not on his side. Every minute spent in the ravine made him more vulnerable to those creatures that stalked the edges of the forest. He needed to move. But first he needed rest, something the lion had not afforded himself in a long time. His body, battered and bruised, yearned for respite. He curled his legs beneath him, trying to make himself as small as possible as the moonlight trickled over his body, casting a soft glow on his golden fur. In the quiet, the lion could hear the faintest sounds of the world around him, an owl's wings cutting through the night air, the distant cry of a hunting pack, and the gentle flow of the stream nearby. The world was alive, teeming with life, life that continued, no matter how many battles were fought or lost. But even in the stillness, he was not alone. The lion's ears flicked at a subtle sound. Too soft, too deliberate to be the wind. Something was near. He remained motionless, his golden eyes scanning the shadows, waiting. His sharp nose twitched, trying to catch the scent of whatever had approached. It was not the hybrid creatures. This scent was different, sweeter, more familiar. Through the darkness, a silhouette emerged, a form that seemed to be floating silently between the trees, barely visible in the low light. The lion's heart skipped a beat as his eyes locked on the figure. It was a female lion, smaller, more delicate than him, but she was a lion nonetheless. She moved gracefully, her powerful muscles rippling beneath her tawny coat. She had the look of a lion who had survived the same trials, the same isolation, and yet carried an aura of strength that could rival his own. The sight of her stirred something deep within him, something he had not allowed himself to feel for a long time. Loneliness. The weight of years spent alone without the companionship of his pride, without the shared warmth of kinship, pressed heavily against his chest. The lion wanted to approach, but he hesitated. He knew nothing of this lioness, nothing of her intentions. She moved with purpose, slowly, as if aware of his presence, but she did not make a sound. She was aware of him, just as he was aware of her. And then, without warning, she stopped and sat down in the shadows, her gaze never leaving his. For a long moment, there was only silence. Neither lion moved, but the tension between them grew, a quiet understanding passing between them. The lion realized that the forest, vast and mysterious as it was, could offer unexpected surprises. It had been a long time since he had shared space with another lion, let alone one that seemed to have lived through her own share of hardships. The lion stretched his neck, testing his sore muscles, and then, with cautious steps, he approached her. There was no growl, no aggression, only a mutual recognition. He sat a few paces away, just close enough to feel the warmth of her presence, yet still distant enough to maintain the space between them. His eyes softened as he regarded her, and for the first time in ages, he did not feel entirely alone. The forest around them seemed to settle into a new rhythm, the heavy weight of uncertainty lifting just slightly. The lion felt something stirring inside him, something that had been dormant for too long. The lioness, too, seemed to feel it. A quiet, shared connection, as though they both understood the unspoken truth that survival in this untamed world was never meant to be a solitary endeavor. They spent the night in the ravine, neither one venturing far, but both present, their instincts alert, yet their hearts grounded in a rare moment of peace. The lion, in his solitude for so long, had learned to fight for his place in the world, but now he was learning that sometimes survival was found not in the struggle alone, but in the companionship of another. The lioness, though silent, seemed to understand this as well. She, too, had walked a lonely path, but perhaps it was time to walk together. As dawn began to break, the lion's thoughts turned to the dangers that still lingered in the forest. The hybrid creatures, still out there, still hunting. The tension in the air was thick once more, but now the lion was no longer alone in his fight. Together, they would face whatever the forest threw their way. The lion, with his years of solitude and strength, and the lioness, with her silent courage and grace. The battle was not over, but in the quiet partnership they had found in the depths of the ravine, there was a new sense of hope. The lion rose, his body still weary but resolute, and with a glance to the lioness he stepped forward, leading the way into the unknown. And as they moved, side by side, through the dense forest, a strange calm settled over them both. The jungle would continue to test them, to throw challenges their way, but together, perhaps they could conquer even the wildest of storms. Together they had already overcome the greatest challenge of all, the journey of finding one another. And in the heart of the wilderness, the lion realized that sometimes survival was not just about fighting. Sometimes it was about finding the courage to share the journey. The sun began to rise, casting its first light through the thick canopy above, a golden glow filtering through the trees like firelight. The lion and the lioness moved silently through the underbrush, the weight of the night's events still pressing on their shoulders, but with a renewed sense of purpose. There was no sound but the soft rustling of leaves beneath their paws, and the distant calls of birds greeting the dawn. The lion kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, his sharp senses alert for any sign of the hybrid creatures. His ears twitched at every movement, his nose constantly testing the air. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, as though the creatures of the jungle had retreated into the shadows, holding their breath. The lioness walked beside him, matching his pace, her presence steady and unyielding. There was no need for words. Their bond, though still new, was forged in the silence of shared experience. She understood the dangers of this place as he did. She had survived this wilderness, too. The forest began to open up ahead, revealing a vast clearing. The tall grasses swayed gently in the wind, their golden tips dancing in the light of the rising sun. A small stream meandered through the middle of the clearing, its waters shimmering with the first rays of daylight. The air here was thick with the scent of fresh earth and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the tension of the previous night. It seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, but the lion did not trust it. He slowed his pace, his eyes scanning the edges of the clearing. Something was wrong. The stillness, the eerie quietness, it felt unnatural. He could hear his heart beating in his chest, the only sound that filled his ears. Then, suddenly, a movement caught his eye. A shadow flickered at the far edge of the clearing, just beyond the trees. It was too quick to be a deer or any other prey. The lion's muscles tensed, his senses sharpening. He could feel the lioness's presence behind him, her own awareness heightening, mirroring his instincts. A low, rumbling growl erupted from the depths of the trees. The lion's heart skipped a beat. It was not the growl of any ordinary predator. It was deep, guttural, and layered with something far more sinister. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of heavy paws thudding against the earth. The lion's eyes narrowed. There was no mistaking it now. The hybrid creatures, the ones that had been hunting him, had found them. He could feel the air grow thick with the anticipation of the hunt. The lioness's body stiffened beside him, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees with a sense of urgency. They were not alone anymore.